So joining me today for a slightly unorthodox looking double Skype interview, because we both have our phones with an audio challenge, is the amazing Dr. Stephen Sinatra, America's leading integrative cardiologist. Hello, Stephen. How are you?
Alex, I'm great. It's good to be here. Even with technology problems, we can overcome it.
We totally can. So you're the author of the best-selling book, The Great Cholesterol Myth, and obviously you've been in practice for a long, long time. I'm really looking forward to chatting to you because what we're talking about today is just shrouded in so much confusion. Do we listen? Don't we listen? What do we do? You know, it can be very stressful for families who are actually confronting this. It's all very well and good for me as a 39-year-old with no heart disease to read this stuff and go, oh yeah, no, I really believe I should be eating my butter and definitely will never take a statin. But when faced with the disease, I still believe there is a lot of stress around what people should do either way, around all the things we're going to be talking about today. So I just want to preface this by saying it is absolutely not a bashing of any amazing surgeons out there or incredible doctors who are fighting for their patients' lives every day. This is not what it's about. It's about just exploring some interesting holistic ways of treating the heart. It's also not about using this information that we talk about today as a diagnosis for any one single case, and it is super important that you go and see your practitioner, specialist or GP about any concerns you might have. So let's hook into the first question. Why did you find yourself choosing to study medicine and then cardiology? Can you what sparked the journey for you?
Yeah, I actually went into medicine because when I was a young boy, when I was around 10 or 12, my mother had diabetes. And around that time, the doctors were really confused about how to treat it. And she was going into insulin shock a lot. She was getting too much insulin, too little insulin, and I would find her on the floor, pass out. I'd have to give her sugar. I had to give her insulin. And even as a young boy, because I was so disappointed the way she was being handled by the medical profession, I decided to become a doctor unconsciously to fix my mother. And that's why I went into medicine and eventually cardiology, because I was a college athlete. I liked athletics. I liked making quick decisions. I liked the drama, and I thought being an invasive cardiologist, emergency room cardiologist, working with acute heart attacks and life and death would be a good specialty for me.
Fantastic. Can you describe the confronting journey you had? Initially, you were a spokesperson for some statin manufacturing companies, and now obviously being someone who warns against their overuse. How did you go through that journey? What were the bits of information that made you start to think differently?
Sure. I mean, first of all, as a chief of cardiology and as a invasive cardiologist where I did my own cardiac catheterizations, I believed in the theory of heart disease with the cholesterol and saturated fat theory. It made sense to me. I mean, in other words, if you ate butter, eggs, milk, cheese, and saturated fat was in those constituents, and saturated fat in the body was turned to cholesterol, and since cholesterol was being vilified at the time as the be-all, end-all of creating heart disease, it made sense. And I used to lecture for the drug companies. I used to use statin drugs. But then in 1993, everything changed, Alex. It was like the boom came down. And what that was I was reading an article in the medical literature, and the article was written, I believe, by some Indian researchers across, actually in your neck of the woods, in the Pacific Ocean. And they stated how statin drugs not only were cholesterol killers, but it knocked out or it decreased the endogenous production of coenzyme Q10, which is the most important nutrient for the heart. And I started using CoQ10 in the early 80s and statins in sort of the late 90s. And I did research on CoQ10. I did research in the human model, the animal model. And I used it extensively in humans for 15 years before statins. And I said, wait a minute. how can something be so good for the heart, a statin drug, yet take out the most important nutrient for the heart? So I had this epiphany in my head, and I said, I cannot lecture for the drug companies anymore. There's something wrong here, and I decided to do my own diligence. And in that process, I was looking at my own angiograms and my own cholesterols in my patients. So let me give you an example. I do an angiogram on a patient with a cholesterol of 280, expecting to find the person riddled with heart disease. I'd find normal coronary arteries. Likewise, I do an angiogram on a patient with a cholesterol of 150, 160, to find no heart disease, and I found, triple vessel disease. And I started to say, wait, doesn't make sense now. And then I started to look at my own data, and I realized that it didn't make sense. 50% of the patients with heart disease had high cholesterol, and 50% had low cholesterol.
Yeah.
So it didn't make sense. It didn't fit. So in the mid to late 90s, I did my own diligence. And then back in 2003, as a peer reviewer for a medical journal, they asked me to review a article on cholesterol and statins. And I thought it was a good article. I thought the authors did a good job, but it was the party line. And I said to the journal, I said, you could accept the article, but it needs balance. It needs an editorial to really balance the article because there was too much grandstanding for cholesterol and statins. The editors came back to me and they said, well, you write the article. And I'll tell you, Alexx, I wrote the article, but I spent 100 hours writing it. I researched every paper I could on statins back in the early 2000s. I just did my homework, and it took me I've written a lot of books. This article was like writing a half a book. And I realized that I was being led down the wrong road. However, now I started to find the truth, and the truth was that statin drugs are good for some people and very, very bad for other people. And treating cholesterol numbers was poor medicine. Treating patients was right medicine. So since 2003, I've been working on this, and then eventually I wrote The Great Cholesterol Myth with Johnny Bowden, and that's how I got to the story that I'm telling you now.
Yeah. Fantastic. Quite a journey.
Long journey. A lot of confusion.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you this, Alexx. I'll tell you this. I could go to the medical literature, and if I had a bias against statins, I could convince you never to use a statin. If I had a bias and quote the literature, I could cherry pick. And if I had a bias for statins, I could talk you into using a statin in almost anyone. This is the problem. Proponents for the cholesterol theory of heart disease, or for the use of statins because they believe in the cholesterol theory, or proponents, people that go against it, I can cite a case either way by cherry picking the literature. I can cherry pick this double-blind study, that study. And at the end of the day, I can find fault with double-blind studies, and even the literature says it. 30 to 40% of double-blind studies, placebo-controlled, have flaws. But there's nothing, Alexx, there's nothing that trumps your personal clinical experience. And that's what I relied on. Thousands of angiograms, practicing clinical cardiology for over 4 decades, using my own brain, not using guidelines, not using algorithms, treating patients, not numbers, finding which patients statins work, which patients they don't work. And I put together the puzzle, and I think I've sorted out the truth. I really think I have. So, I feel that statins are good for some people, but not for others. And they do good in a lot of people. They can do very, very bad things in some people. But every clinician has to treat an individual patient, especially if they're going to put them on a drug that could cause serious harm over the long term.
Absolutely. So you mentioned there that they are, in your opinion, good for some people. Who are those people? Is there a group? You talk about it a little bit in your book, of course, but if you could share that with us.
Anybody with what we call unstable angina or acute coronary syndrome, where they're having like a heart attack, a slow heart attack. It's almost like cutting a dog's tail off an inch at a time. Patients are in the hospital, they're having chest pain, they're having what we call cellular death with leakage of enzymes from the heart showing cell death. These people desperately need a statin. but not for cholesterol lowering.
Mm.
Statins work in so many other areas that do good things. They happen to be antioxidants. They happen to be anti-inflammatories. But the best thing they do is they thin the blood.
Mm.
They have a terrific impact on what we call blood rheology, where they can change the shape of red blood cells going through the spleen. They can make the blood more slippery. And when you do that, the blood sticks less. It's sticky blood. It's hypercoagulable blood. It's when your blood is like red ketchup, that if it gets stuck in the heart or the brain, you have a heart attack or a stroke. Statins do a great job of that, and they've shown that in clinical studies. If you're in a hospital, Alex, and you have what we call unstable angina or an acute coronary syndrome, and the young doctor takes you off the statin drug thinking that, one less drug to give you, you have a 3 times more chance of dying than somebody staying on that drug, just because of thinning of the blood. And then they did this study in Scotland about 20 years ago. We call it the ROSUP study, where they took high-risk men. And these men happen to be smoking men, lots of high-risk male. But a lot of the men had what we call low HDL. Now, low HDL and smoking will put you in double handcuffs for heart disease. And the reason being is that they both create hypercoagulability. They both make your blood like red ketchup. Smoking pollutes the blood with carbon monoxide and nicotine, makes the blood stick. It's loaded with insecticides and pesticides. Tobacco has it, and it creates coagulation of the blood. If you have a low HDL, the problem with low HDL, the lower the HDL, the more immune system dysfunction you have and the more stickiness of your blood. And the Scotland researchers who showed an impact of pravastatin in these high-risk men, they said in this study, they said, hey, the statins worked. We had less cardiac events, but it had nothing to do with cholesterol lowering. It had more to do on what we call the pleiotropic, the additional, the extra effects of statins. They even mentioned plasma and blood viscosity. So that was written up about 20 years ago, and that's a very, very good, truthful study on statins.
Fantastic. If I put the call out to my readers to say, I'm going to be having a chat with Dr. Sinatra, what are your questions around cardiology, integrative cardiology? And actually a number of parents were voicing concerns over their children as young as 9, 11 with familial hypercholesterolemia, if I'm pronouncing that right. Yeah, great. And their concern for doctors suggesting statins for such things. Now, you've just talked about how it's really not about, it's about separating statins out from their role in cholesterol lowering and in terms of their effectiveness when you pinpoint what they might be effective for. So would that be an effective decision for children with such a presentation?
Yeah. Let me say it this way. First of all, the best group that statins do a marvelous job in is men under the age of 75 with proven coronary artery disease. I mean, statins work much better in men than they do in women. Do I use statins in women? Yes. There's a small percentage of women where statins will make a difference, but very, very small, maybe less than 2%. Men, it's different because women get more side effects than men. But men under the age of 75, statins do make a difference, and it's worth the risk profile. In other words, it's worth it for a male to have less coronary events, less revascularization, less heart attack, less stent closure if he's on a statin. Now, there's another group of people with familial hypercholesterolemia that I look at as well. Now, let's look at familial hypercholesterolemia. First of all, it's a genetically inherited disorder. And if there's a child who gets 2 genes, in other words, a double recessive, this is a disaster. This is a total disaster because these children, they die usually before the age of 16. They have cholesterols of over 1,000. They have receptor site problems. And what these children really need is liver transplants to really correct the problem. Mm. Now, suppose you get one gene. We call it familial hypercholesterolemia, but not a double dose. You get sort of a single dose. And this happens in 1 in 500 people. These people, Alex, have high cholesterols. Mm. I've seen them as high as 850, 750, 600. They're high. And here's the deal. I've taken care of, I'd say, a couple of dozen of these patients over my career. Half of them live into their 80s and 90s without heart disease. The other half get heart disease before the age of 50. Mm. So this is a dilemma now, because remember, if the cholesterol is high and it oxidizes, it becomes pro-inflammatory. If these people are smokers, high stress, low HDLs, high mercury, high insecticide, pesticide. In other words, if the company of their high cholesterol is inflammatory and they're not eating the right diets and everything, these people will probably go on to develop heart disease, coronary artery disease, especially if they have dysfunctional HDL or they don't have a higher number of HDL to protect them on an immune basis. Mm-hmm. So this is what I recommend. First of all, I don't like treating children. I don't believe in treating children. However, when these children get to be young adults in their 20s, and if they have very high cholesterols, over 500, and the cholesterol is fractionated, it happens to be an inflammatory type of cholesterol, happens to have dysfunctional HDL, the blood could show inflammatory triglycerides, it can show inflammatory, what we call LP(a). If the cholesterol profile looks ominous, yes, I would treat these young adults with a statin. Mm-hmm. I would treat, but I'm not going to treat all these kids, all these young adults. I'm going to choose the ones that I think are at higher risk. So again, medicine to me is more of an art than just writing a prescription. Mm-hmm. So if I had a young adult in their, let's say, 30s, late 20s with a cholesterol of 450, and I fractionate the cholesterol, it's sort of a benign type of cholesterol, his risk factor or her risk factor is low, other risk factors are low, I might hold off on a statin drug and treat that patient with lifestyle interactions and follow the patient closely, maybe do coronary screenings on them, maybe get an EBCT scan when they get a little bit older to see if there's any plaque in the coronaries, maybe do an exercise test. In other words, screen them, follow them closely, but categorically to put them on a drug for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, no. No, not unless it's been shown to me that taking a drug has a greater advantage than not taking the drug. So again, these familial situations, a little bit more difficult, a little bit more moving parts, but each individual one you have to look at on an individual basis.
Yeah. So I'm just going to poke a little further there. When you mention oxidized cholesterol, this is really where the environmental aspects of a person's life come into play, right? So in terms of diet, there's a lot of reach for the butter, it's okay, and in fact has been shown to help lower triglycerides, which obviously you're saying is a bad thing when they're elevated. Are there any other should we not be scared of giving butter to people?
I eat butter. I eat organic butter all the time. Yeah. I had it with Brussels sprouts last night for dinner. Excellent. See, here's the deal. There's good fats, there's bad fats, and there's killer fats. I call it the good, the bad, and the ugly. Mm-hmm. The trans fats are the worst. Yeah. This oxidizes cholesterol like a New York minute. I mean, it just oxidizes cholesterol. It's a disaster. That's why in our country, when margarine was propagated in the 90s, corn oil margarine, there was a huge spike in cholesterol, and that was a problem. So we have to omit the trans fats. We must omit the trans fats. Now, the omega-6 oils, like canola oil, corn oil, cottonseed oil, or the partially hydrogenated oils, these can cause oxidation of LDL. So we need to be very cautious in using those oils. Olive oil, extra virgin olive oil, is great stuff. It's pure stuff. And extra virgin olive oil will not only help to raise your HDL, but will also take small particle LDL and make it a little more fluffier and a little more less invasive. So olive oil is really the secret sauce of the Mediterranean diet. And I've spoken about olive oil many times on my Heart MD Institute website, on drsinatra.com. I mean, I love olive oil. It's phenomenal stuff. Now, even though it's a monounsaturated fat, it's less prone to oxidation. It's like avocado. Avocado contains a lot of fat, but avocado is good for you. It lowers the insulin response. It gives you glutathione. It helps you absorb more lutein and lycopene, which protects the oxidation of LDL. And coconut oil, which is a saturated fat, is good for you. That's, again, in your neck of the woods in the South Pacific. I mean, there's nothing wrong with, organic, unrefined coconut oil. It's phenomenal stuff. I cook with it all the time. Remember, the more saturated the fat is, the least the oxidation.
Yeah.
So these polyunsaturated oils, like the canola oil, the corn oil, the vegetable oils, these oxidize like that. And when you do that, you're creating inflammation. So do I cook in butter? Absolutely. Would I cook in olive oil? No. I use olive oil I douse it on my salads, my steamed vegetables, stuff like that. Do I cook with coconut oil? Sure I do. Because it's very resistant to oxidation. Salmon tastes great in it. On my Heart MD Institute website, I did a cooking series with my son, and we cooked a nice fillet of salmon in a combination of coconut with a little bit of olive oil. Remember, if you use a lighter olive oil, you can get a higher, melting point on it. The extra virgin olive oils, the melting point is lower, so that's why you don't want to cook with it as much as, let's say, a coconut oil.
Fantastic. So we've talked about quite a few things already. I just want to clear one little thing up because I think that still might be unclear for people out there. So it seems that we shouldn't necessarily be afraid of cholesterol per se, but we should be afraid of any kind of environmental choices we're making to destroy a healthy cholesterol profile. Am I right in saying that?
Yes, and the worst environmental toxin is sugar.
Yeah, great.
Sugar. Now,
it's
not just the sugar you put in your coffee,
yeah.
Although that's evil, okay, when you're putting teaspoons of sugar. It's the sugar we're getting in the diet, the high fructose corn syrup and sodas. Sodas bring nothing to the table. Dead calories, pure sugar, drive insulin relationships in the wrong direction. The spike insulin. And remember, it's insulin that causes the endothelial unfriendly atmosphere of smaller blood vessels. And it causes endothelial cell dysfunction. Now, so sugars are the worst. And the problem is that we're eating pastas, we're eating breads, we're eating white rice, we're eating potatoes, we're eating crackers, and the list goes on, and sweets. And when you put that into the diet and you overwhelm the diet, then you're getting more and more insulin response, and you're getting more and more endothelial cell dysfunction and more inflammation. When you eat more fats, you don't get the insulin response, fats and proteins. I like organic fats because I remember this, fats can be damaging if you're eating non-organic fats. For example, if you're eating, let's say, or you're eating beef that is just non-organic or non-range fed, you could be getting a lot of insecticide and pesticide in that fat, because that's where the insecticides and pesticides lie. Same thing is true of radiation. It lies in the fat. The chemicals lie in fat. The heavy metals lie in fat. So if you do eat a lot of fat, you must use caution and use organic fats at all costs. So when you look at diet, if you get sugar out of the diet and eat more fat and protein, not only are you going to, lose weight, but you're also going to protect your body from inflammation. And remember this, Alex, the inflammatory cytokines, C-reactive protein, the interleukins, the messengers that cause inflammation in the body, they live in fat cells. So the more fat you reduce in the body, the less inflammation. But remember, it's not fat that makes you fat. It's sugar that makes you fat. Because if the calories do not get metabolized by insulin, by eating too many sugar calories. They're stored as fat. And then you get more inflammation, and then, it's a disaster. So you take the sugar out of your diet, and you're in great shape.
Absolutely.
That's the enemy of heart disease, not cholesterol.
I'll stress there also that sugar is bread, pasta, rice, potatoes, because I don't know if anyone else did this experiment when they were in science class at school, but we got made to chew on a piece of bread in our mouths, but way past it being liquid, we kept chewing, and the idea was to see when the starches converted to sugar, and it honestly tasted like you all of a sudden had sugar syrup in your mouth. I'll never forget
sugar.
that.
It's sugar.
It is.
Yeah.
That's it.
It is sugar.
So a lot of people think, I quit the sodas, but then they're having a sandwich, and then they're having crackers, and they're having rice, and, it's still sugar, isn't it?
It is. And I'll tell you, Alexx, I'm an anti-aging doctor also. I have a lot of, I did a lot of training, and one of it was in anti-aging medicine. And the sine qua non of aging is sugar. Mm. When you have sugar in your body and a lot of sugar in the bloodstream, it combines what we call with proteins, the amino acids in the blood, and it causes what we call glycation. And when we have a lot of what we call glycated end products in our bloodstream, it ages you. Not just ages the heart and the blood vessels, it ages the skin, the eyes. It ages everything. So if people want to prevent aging, less sugar. Yeah. And they've done that. By the way, there's a nice study on that on the skin and the heart. They looked at Australia, they looked at the United States, and they looked at countries like Scandinavia. And they all had the same data. The more donuts you ate, the more sugar you ate, the more skin the more skin aging you got, the more aging of the heart you got. So, this runs worldwide. So we need to really back off on the sugar.
We do. So it's really interesting, isn't it? Because, the famous Ansel Keys 7-country study where there were many other little plots on that graph that were removed to show a particular type of evidence. But then at the same time, there were scientists like John Yudkin who were saying this is, saturated fats are not the villain. It's sugar. Why did we not listen? Is it because of, I get a bit Aaron Brockovich on things like this and start to think, about all the backdoor deals that were being done to make sure that the appropriate truth was given to the public. But the fact that then all of these right plates and food pyramids and everything were constructed when there was still, it was a hypothesis. It wasn't even set in stone. How can you explain to us how on earth this happens? Is it really just money?
We talked about this in the Great Cholesterol Myth, and the bigger the lie, the more people will believe it, and it just made sense. If fat has 9 calories per gram, and carbohydrate has 4 calories per gram. People said, well, if I eat less fat, less calories, I'm going to, have less weight. And if I have less weight, I'm going to be healthier. But the reverse is true because of this insulin relationship. And the same thing is true with, fats and sugars. Because when Ansel Keys cherry-picked his data, and when the McGovern campaign, in the United States, when he was Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare, the Harvard group tried to look at these researchers from Harvard. They tried to say, well, if we eat less fat and if we believe Keys, well, maybe we can make a dent in America here, because Eisenhower, our president back then, had heart disease, and Ike liked his bacon and eggs and his butter. So they tried to pin the villain on cholesterol. And Time magazine came out with this big picture with a couple of eggs on the face and bacon with a mouth that went down. And things got steamrolling, and doctors bought it hook, line, and sinker. I bought it. Yeah. I believed it. And when you think of it, like myself, board certified internist, board certified cardiologist, certified nutritionist. Hey, Alexx, if I could believe it, then a lot of people is going to believe it. But and here's the other deal. Look, if you can make cholesterol the enemy, now you got to develop drugs to treat the enemy. So now you got corporate greed. You got. There's so many variables and so many moving parts that now we got to take it down and tell the truth. Now, look, I mean, there's fanaticism on both sides of the fence here. You know, I mean, you're going to find dozens of doctors that aren't going to agree with me, and that's fine. That's fine. Every doctor has to find their own truth. But the truth is that these statin drugs will help some people, but not on cholesterol. I mean, even this last study presented at the American Heart Association, this enhanced study that showed that 2 drugs lower the cholesterols even more, and these people had having less cardiac events. But the drug companies were smart. They took 18,000 people with acute coronary syndrome. They took the highest risk people on the planet and gave them a statin and Zeti or another cholesterol drug that impedes the absorption. And, you know, instead of treating people with high cholesterols and primary prevention and women and where these drugs don't work, you know, they're getting smarter and smarter. But, again, these studies would show what they call a relative reduction, or they'll show if you treat, you know, one person out of 50 over 5 years will have less cardiovascular events. I mean, you know, what's going to happen to the other 49? I mean, and again, people praise these studies, and doctors jump on the bandwagon and say, oh, this is great. Everybody should take a statin. It should be in our water supply. We should be giving it to the kids. We should be giving it to everybody. I mean, it's nonsense. It's Frankenstein medicine. But there is a place for statins. And like I said before, men under the age of 75, I don't care what their cholesterol is, Alex. I'm going to treat them with a statin anyway because I want to thin their blood and I want to use it as an anti-inflammatory. So, you know, is cholesterol a problem? Yeah, but with familial cholesterolemia it is, with hypercholesterolemia. If the cholesterol gets oxidized, or if the cholesterol is predominantly Lp(a), which is a very small particle that's highly inflammatory, that's genetically, you know, passed on. I mean, yeah, there are some cholesterol subtypes that are more harmful, but you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I mean, we need cholesterol. We need it for our brain. We need it to think. We need it for neurotransmitters. We need it to lubricate our skin. We need it for our sex hormones. We need it for bile salts. We need it for vitamin D. I mean, look, you guys in Australia probably get more vitamin D than we do in America. But remember this, when the sun hits your skin, it activates cholesterol in your skin to make vitamin D3, which is a hormone that is, you know, the darling of the immune system. So why vilify cholesterol? Why? I mean, we need it in so many ways. And I'll tell you this, Alex, one of the best ways of preventing infectious disease of the lung and of the GI tract is with higher cholesterol. People with higher cholesterol have more resistance to infection. I mean, that's pretty cool. You know, that's pretty cool. So anyway, there's so many things that cholesterol can do for the body. Why kill it? Why vilify it when we can vilify sugar a heck of a lot more? Absolutely. And we feel a heck of a lot better.
Yeah, definitely. So, oh God, there's so many questions I have around all of that goodness you just shared. So it sounds to me like if you have what might be deemed as high cholesterol, and let's remember that normal cholesterol was lowered even further. I think in the early 2000s, 2004 or something, was it?
Yeah.
Which a lot of skeptics argue was for the drug companies to make more money. If you have high cholesterol, it could actually just be, if you don't present with any of the risks and you don't have arterial plaque and you just have a higher cholesterol, as is viewed by modern medicine, essential is to ensure that we live a healthy lifestyle so that cholesterol isn't damaged. Is that right?
Sure. Yeah, sure. I mean, look, heavy metals will oxidize cholesterol. Cigarette smoke will oxidize cholesterol. Trans fats will do it. So there's so many things in the environment that can make cholesterol angry. But you don't blame the firemen. When there's a fire, do you blame the firemen for starting it? No, they're coming to the rescue. Yeah. And that's what happens with cholesterol. So But there's so many natural things you can do. I mean, you can take omega-3 essential fatty acids. You can take pycnogenol, which lowers blood sugar. You can take coenzyme Q10, which prevents the oxidation of LDL, especially if you combine it with a little mixed tocopherols, a vitamin E, or tocotrienols will help to prevent the oxidation of LDL. A little bit of niacin can do it. Citrus bergamot, the jury's still not out, but that's sort of a flavonoid that comes from from Italy, from Calabria, which lowers triglycerides, blood sugar, and raises HDL. That's the real trifecta, as far as I'm concerned. If you can lower blood sugar, lower triglycerides, and raise HDL, that is really heart healthy, because then you're doing a lot of good stuff for the heart. So I mean, there's a lot of things people can do, but reaching for a statin for a high cholesterol number, no, that's not smart medicine.
No.
Not at all.
And you talk a lot about a type of environmental stressor that you can't really see. It's more about what you feel, and that is stress. Talk to us about stress and its role in heart disease.
Yeah, when I became a psychotherapist, I actually became a bioenergetic psychotherapist. I studied psychotherapy for 10 years, and I realized that stress was really the number one risk factor for the heart. In fact, emotional stress will do more to damage the heart than eating high cholesterol. And I talked about that 20 years ago when I wrote the book Heartbreak and Heart Disease. But the way stress affects the body, especially vital exhaustion, which is the worst stressor, is that you're turning on your adrenal glands. You're getting cortisol driven. When you do that, these neurohormones in your body, they deplete potassium in the body, they increase blood pressure, they increase heart rate, they make the blood more sticky, and that's a setup for, it's almost like having neurohormonal suicide. And when I wrote about it, Heartbreak and Heart Disease, that's one of the reasons why when Dr. Cannon studied voodoo death in your area, the South Pacific again, when he looked at voodoo death, he realized that it wasn't a witch doctor's curse that caused the problem, it was the fear of the curse. And fear is a very, very damaging emotion. So when your subconscious has this little voice talking to you, you gotta quiet it, because fear is a very, very deadly emotion, as is rage. Is really bad. Anger is the Achilles heel for the cardiovascular system. So, our emotions are very, very key in health, and emotional conflicts and toxic emotions and blocked emotions will be a much more conducive setup for heart disease than eating eggs, bacon, and organic bacon, that is, and organic eggs and organic butter.
So maybe that's what was up with Eisenhower then. We blamed the eggs and the bacon, but it was actually the stress of being the president of the United States.
And being the Allied commander in World War II.
Yeah, that's.
I mean, come on. I mean, Germany almost won the war that year. I mean, it was a race for the atomic bomb, and Eisenhower had that Normandy invasion on his shoulders, and there's a lot of, let me tell you, it's what Eisenhower went through, and Churchill. I mean, thank God we had great statesmen back in that day and age.
So a lot of people are probably starting to maybe think of their own situation, maybe think of how they're being treated, how they think perhaps their doctor might have jumped to conclusions to put them on a statin when maybe it might not be what they should be doing. Is there any kind of a register that exists globally for integrative doctors and cardiologists that you're aware of, that people can kind of turn to some sort of resource to know who is treating the heart, both holistically and with the up-to-the-minute research in modern medicine as well?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that the Academy for Anti-Aging Medicine, the A4M, does a good job because it's a worldwide organization. They lecture, or their doctors lecture all through the South Pacific, China, Europe, South America, and the United States. And it's going to be similar to the conventional model, but at least you're going to get doctors who think out of the box a little bit. Some of these doctors, do heavyweight statins in their patients, but other doctors don't. I would just tell your listeners this: try to find a doctor you trust, that you believe in, and follow his or her advice. I mean, but again, doctors that rely on the pharmaceutical dark age and only pharmaceutical drugs, I think these doctors only treat half the person. I mean, look, would I use a pharmaceutical drug in a patient with asthma or a child with, of course I would. Would I use it in somebody with heart failure? Of course I would. But I'm not reaching for pharmaceutical drugs when there's so many alternatives out there that can do a better job without the side effect profile as well.
Brilliant. And where do you see this whole cholesterol and statin debate in 20 years? Out of curiosity.
It's going to continue, Alex. Unfortunately, like I said before, depending on your bias. And I mean, the good news with me is I don't have a bias because I do use statin drugs in males, regardless of cholesterol. I don't believe in a cholesterol theory, but there's many doctors out there with bias because they believe in what they're doing. And I got to believe in their own heart, they think it's the truth. So the problem is this controversy will go on forever because the studies will be done and basically anybody can choose whatever studies they want, just like what, Keyes did. We can cherry pick the studies to support our conclusions. So it's going to go on forever and, that's the way it's going to be. But for your listeners, I would just tell them to try to make an intelligent decision. Because to put yourself on a drug to lower a cholesterol number, in my opinion, is going on the road to further problems. And people got to realize that pharmaceutical drugs can be very, very good, but can be very, very bad, especially when you're taking them long term.
Mm. And in terms of someone who presents with plaque, let's just say there's a little bit of plaque. It's nothing that's saying, surgery tomorrow kind of thing. Can you reverse that naturally? Is it possible?
Oh, yeah. Actually, one of my books, Reverse Heart Disease Now, I did a whole thing on plaque reversal and plaque stabilization. Yeah, vitamin K2 I really like. Yeah. Vitamin K2 is called Medequinone 7. I actually met the two Dutch guys from Holland who really spent 30 years of their life studying vitamin K2. I met each one individually and really picked their brains, and they're really onto something because vitamin K2 not only takes calcium out of blood vessels where it doesn't belong, but it puts it back in bones. So for women and for men, aging men like myself, we need calcium in our bones. So I like vitamin K2 for plaque reversal. I like omega-3 essential fatty acids because, it helps prevent plaque rupture. I like pomegranate. I like green tea. I like coenzyme Q10 because it prevents oxidation of LDL. I love metabolic cardiology. Whenever you use metabolic cardiology and you increase ATP or adenosine triphosphate in a preferential direction when you drive enzymatic reactions inside the heart, this in itself helps to repair heart cells and rejuvenate and revive heart cells. So I just feel there's so many things you can do to stabilize plaque and also reverse plaque that I just feel that you just need to find the right doctor or read the right book or, just do your own diligence.
Yeah. And so important. You've said it a couple of times now, but to feel a sense that you're working with someone who gets your case, who feels like they've so really important. Looked at everything before making a decision with you rather than a quick 15-minute appointment and some cholesterol numbers. That's when you should be ringing alarm bells, isn't it?
Yeah, I would always tell my patients to partner with me. I would tell them, I need you to keep me honest. You bring me information. You bring me articles. If you read something about a vitamin, I want to hear about it. If you can empower me with information, I'll help empower other people. And the most important thing about the physician-patient relationship is that the patient has to truly believe that they can get well. That's positive intention. And if the physician believes that he can help that person get well, oh my gosh, then you can get real healing. And that's the key. You don't want to treat a patient on a 5-minute, visit or a 15-minute visit, look at the lab test, not even examine the patient, write a prescription. That's not the way medicine should be practiced.
Wonderful. I think that's a fantastic way to finish.
Sure, that's great.
It's been absolutely fantastic chatting to you and having a look at this very, very confusing issue. Hopefully we've cleared that up for some people out there today, in my audience and beyond. Did you have anything you wanted to say to us to finish? Is there anything you haven't had a chance to say yet?
No, I think I said it all.
Yeah,
I think when doctors choose patients, when patients choose a doctor, the other thing that a doctor needs to do, and I'll just give you tips for your clientele, is if the doctor sees the patient struggle and he sees that the person is suffering and he sees the search and he understands that person in front of him, that's so important. And that's what people need. They need to see that they're suffering and they're struggling, and doctors need to acknowledge that. And once they do, real healing takes place. So I wanted to just end with that thing as well. That point. That's very important.
wonderful.
That's the art of medicine.
Yeah, it is. And I have a doctor like that, and and a naturopath like that, and a kinesiologist like that. It's about getting people who really see you in your corner, because
Yes, exactly.
we all need that feeling of connection. Yeah.
Yes, that's my next book, by the way. It's about spiritual. So we're all connected, and my next book is on the spirituality and the connectedness of everybody in the world.
Oh my God! I'm going to have to get you back. We're going to have to talk about that book. That sounds incredible.
Yeah, it's going to be released November 2015.
Okay.
So.
But for now, there are plenty of books you can read if you want to look up Dr. Sinatra's work. The Great Cholesterol Myth is one I highly recommend. I really enjoyed it as my family grappled with one of our family members and what to do, in that it really helped provide us a whole picture of the situation and helped us choose practitioners accordingly. So I want to thank you once again for your time, Dr. Sinatra.
Thank you, Alexx.
Wonderful chatting to you, and I'll speak with you again soon. Thanks.
Great. We'll see you. Bye-bye.